Our story begins with this handsome blonde guy telling our protagonist that he might die tomorrow, all because of a dream he had. But Jian didn't understand what he was talking about. He had already defeated thousands of calamities, far more than the two chosen ones combined. How could he imagine that he would actually die? Later, at the Demon Tower, this was where the worst calamity lived. The one that wiped out all of humanity. It all started on the last day of the 20th century. Calamities appeared out of nowhere one day and cornered humanity with overwhelming power. Just as humans were sinking into chaos and horror, 12 gods appeared calling themselves divine gods. They promised humans the power to overcome the calamities and chose 12 awakened ones to save and rule the world. But something unexpected happened. A 13th awakened one appeared, with the difference being that this person hadn't received a blessing from any god. And much to the annoyance of the 12 awakened ones, he was overwhelmingly stronger than them. They were at the castle, and Jian defeated every calamity that showed up. They were amazed, and Hugo thanked him, since they were able to conquer the Demon Tower because of him. Jian just wanted them to thank him with some fried chicken. The other saints talk about how if they eliminate the Crimson, they'll likely get incredible rewards, since it's the worst calamity of all. They expect to receive at least 100 billion, Jian says. They should all be satisfied with a good life and give the money to other countries, since they're on the verge of bankruptcy because of the Crimson. An official tries to blackmail them. He needs to get a lot of money to make deals with them. Only they can restore his old face and heal his scarred body. They also warn Jian not to go running off to kill calamities just because someone asks for help, since they need a certain number of accidental victims to get a higher reward. Jian thinks that even though they're called saints, they're really just thugs who only care about themselves. He plans to cut ties with them once he defeats the Crimson. Later, in the boss room of the Crimson Demon Tower, 10 chosen ones were terrified to the point where they just wanted to run away. The pressure from that demon was unlike anything they had ever felt. Because of the power this calamity possessed, everyone ran away, fleeing from a situation that meant certain death. Everyone except our protagonist, who charges in without a single hint of fear. But it had all been a setup to lure Jian into a trap, stabbing him with a dagger in his chest and sending him falling into the abyss of the Demon Tower. Down there, he wondered. How much time has passed? What is the outside world like now? He has to keep fighting, no matter what. Because this place was a special trap that summoned infinite calamities, but that wouldn't be enough to kill him. He told them to just wait. He was definitely going to survive this, and then he'd rip those bastards' heads off. As time passed, exactly 20 years later, he reached the very last demon, who was dying of fear, since it was impossible for anyone to reach that place, and it begged for mercy. But Jian, who by the way looks like a Viking god now, doesn't hesitate to kill it, finally reaching the end of his journey, and the tower begins to crumble. He finally believes he can get out, and then he faints. Then, the scene changes. Outside, everything was destroyed, and two people were running for their lives. High-rank calamities were chasing them. They had taken a wrong turn and unfortunately ran right into them. The wolves managed to catch up. Both of them were already resigned to their deaths. When an explosion is heard in the distance, they didn't understand what was happening. It's our protagonist, who is cursing everyone out for how they dared to backstab him and push him into a trap. They were damn bastards. He's going to kill them all, and in his rage, he defeats wolf after wolf. They think those wolves are orange calamities, which even high-rank awakened would struggle with, but he crushed them like insects. They're shocked because he came from that tower. But the other doesn't think it's possible for anyone to leave that tower alive. Jian jumped toward them, and almost in tears they beg him not to hurt them. But then the boss wolf appears behind them. They both think they're dead, as they couldn't survive an attack from the boss. But Jian steps in to block the attack, protecting them, insulting the wolf, saying it was just a puppy. He defeats it with a single blow and asks the guys if they could go buy him some food and some clothes as well. Later at a restaurant, John had eaten $10,000 worth of food. Guys, $10,000. And he had even held back since they told him they didn't have much money. They ask if he's a disciple and what he was doing in the tower. John replies that he just came out of the tower, offering no further explanation. He's not a follower of any god. Why would he serve such despicable beings then? Seeing his reflection in a spoon, he's shocked. He demands a mirror immediately. And sure enough, his wounds had healed and his left arm had regenerated. A mark on his palm catches his eye, and then a sharp pain flares up as messages begin to appear. You have experienced death. Now you can use the power of Ophucus. He enters a state of ecstasy. Right before his eyes was a giant snake with eyes that radiated power and confidence. Jian wakes up and asks if they also saw a giant snake, but no one had seen it. Looking at his palm, he sees the skills he now possesses. He realizes his physical change was thanks to a new super regeneration skill. He's heard of something similar with the other saints, but he can't feel the presence of any god. But anyway, regardless of that, what he had to do now was kill the saints who fled and slaughter the one who stabbed him in the back. At the site where the Demon Tower was destroyed, journalists and officials are trying to figure out who could have done it. Even the saints would have trouble with those beasts, and they begin to speculate that Li Jian might have actually returned. At a press conference, the Saint of the Ram was present, Jiang Wei. Reporters asked for his opinion on the news that Jian might have survived after 20 years, but all he said was that he had no comment. Later in his car, he was furious because he had been hearing Jian's name all day long, over and over. What they were saying was impossible. No one could survive 20 years in that tower with tens of thousands of evil beings, and to make matters worse, they were all black rank. His body was already falling apart from the recoil of his powers. He hadn't even received a blessing to help him, but in the hypothetical case that he actually survived, everything would be over for them. Elsewhere, Mr. Hugo Otters steps off a plane, drawing a lot of admiration from the people there. As the divine Sagittarius, he was a true chosen one. On his way to a very important conference, his phone wouldn't stop ringing. He figured it was those damn journalists coming up with more conspiracy theories about Jian, always claiming that he was still alive. But 20 years had already passed. He didn't understand how that could be possible. Remembering what happened, he had stayed outside the tower at Jian's request to defeat the calamities. He prayed his prophecy was wrong and that Jian would return safely. But only the divine being survived. They abandoned Jian and returned with the head of the Red Eye. Their achievements were recognized, and the 12 divine beings, including him, were hailed as heroes, allowing them to gain wealth and authority. He couldn't believe Jian was dead and requested a search multiple times. But Malin, the divine being of Cancer, convinced everyone it was impossible, since there were too many calamities in that tower for anyone to enter. But if Hugo wanted to go, he'd have to go alone, as none of the 12 constellations would help him. He concluded that no matter how strong Jian was, getting out of that tower was impossible. And then a call from the Prime Minister comes through, who tells him that the Demon Tower has fallen, but Hugo isn't willing to believe any conspiracies since Jian was dead. There was no other answer, but the Prime Minister had just received information from Korea that Lee Jian's exclusive direct line was used just moments ago. An excited Hugo asks the driver to stop, since the calls he just received were actually from Jian. He calls him back, and what he hears is a "What's wrong?" Jian is calm and remembers having donated all of his own possessions to orphanages before he died. He wonders if they were kept safe, but he sees that all his belongings were split among the 12 constellations, and he loses it again, breaking the phone and declaring he'll kill them all. The guy cries over his phone, since he hadn't even finished paying for it. Jian plans to announce his return, but it wouldn't be easy, since his appearance has changed over the last 20 years. If he says he's Jian, everyone will call him crazy, so first, he'll focus on getting revenge on each of the constellations. Then he gets a message, so he decides to get some fresh air and notices something. What he was looking at was a domestic god. These are divine entities controlled by the blessed gods. These domestic gods were subordinates of Ares, and Jian gets angry. Those things were asking for a tribute, and then this stupid couple appears, who are walking along talking about what's trending. They think people are stupid for caring about a loser who disappeared 20 years ago. Some guys warn Jian to run away because the couple belongs to the Gemini group, and they're dangerous. The guy tells him to screw off, blowing cigarette smoke in his face and asking why he's so mad. The woman thinks they should just leave, saying a guy like him might pee himself from fear. He agrees, saying losers like them always admired guys like Jian. They were clearly taking refuge in the memory of someone who was much weaker than any of the saints. They shouldn't have said that to Jian. Jian calls them cockroaches. They turn back and confront him, telling him to repeat what he just said. How could someone so weak speak to them like that? And before he can finish the sentence, Jian gives him a light tap, which sends him flying and knocks him unconscious. Seeing what happened, the woman tries to use a Rasengan, but the protagonist saw it coming and gives her another flick with his finger. I know this move as a tin can flick, but I don't know about you guys. The bystanders complain that he shouldn't use his skills in the middle of the street, especially against the disciples of Manhwa, but he had only been defending himself, and if he hadn't done anything, he could have died. He knew something was off when he hit them. Their equipment seemed divine, but that shouldn't be possible, since only saints are supposed to have them. And here's the explanation. Jian didn't know it yet, but when humanity was nearly wiped out by the calamities, the divine gods chose 12 saints. However, since the world couldn't be protected by only 12 people, the saints gathered followers and formed divine cadres. Those who awaken after receiving power from the saints are called disciples, and they are ranked by their strength. For example, there's the triple S rank, which consists of the chosen saints who lead their divine cadres. The double S ranks, the 10 stars who are considered saint candidates. The S rank, the strongest disciples who command others in battle. The A ranks, who are the strongest disciples within their own squads. And the B and C ranks, which make up the rest of the disciples. The power of the divine gods comes from the faith of these disciples. I don't know if the word disciples bothers you, but it feels a bit weird to me. Anyway, the saints hold all sorts of contests to recruit people, and the chosen disciples receive gifts from the gods, and it's been this way for 20 years. Jian turns around and sees that the household gods had been watching what happened. They urged him to finish off the man and woman, craving bloodshed, and promised him a useful gift if he killed them both. These beings were like shadows of the divine gods, so opposing them was the same as opposing the gods themselves. They tell him to hurry up and do what they want, but Jian wasn't having it. He wondered why Yang Wei's thugs were in a place like this, but it was obvious. They were just trying to fill their pockets. He thinks to himself that Yang Wei is still the same bastard as always, with a single stomp, which creates a shockwave that clears away the sheep clouds. Looking at the unconscious man, he figures if he's someone important. Since everything he's wearing is designer brand, he decides to rob him blind. A few hours later, they're outside the apartment of his buddy, who thanks him for saving his life and bringing him home today. But Jian asks if he's going in yet, saying he's already sleepy. He also takes the chance to cut his hair, and man, he's looking good. In the past, every strand of hair was precious to him, since he used to lose it as a side effect of his abilities. He notices there's a small calamity in the house, which was very strange, since that usually means something is attracting them. And that's because he has all these evil artifacts. One was an object received directly from Gemini. They were his most prized relics, and the protagonist just slices them up. He complains that the mask was a divine artifact that controlled whoever wore it. The music box was for stealing personal info, and the watch was to attract calamities. He's furious that the saints not only stole his money, but are also giving away evil artifacts to fuel their own magic and wealth. Suddenly, this character appears, who is actually the owner of the house. The buddy explains the whole story of how they met, but the owner doesn't believe a word of it, and to make matters worse, Jian had broken all the divine artifacts in the house. He asks Jian which divine cadre he's from or which god he follows, and when he finds out Jian doesn't follow anyone, he asks for his name. Upon hearing the name, Li Hyun flies into a rage, shouting that someone broke into his house and destroyed all the divine artifacts while pretending to be Li Jian, activating his full power. A warning message appears on the screen expressing that if he keeps this up, he'll burn the whole house down. He checks the redhead's stats, which were actually quite strong, even capable of using a high-rank summon at such a young age. He tells Yiming to get out if he doesn't want to die. That's the first time they've said his name, and here I was calling him Buddy the whole time. But out of nowhere, Jian gets behind him and knocks him out with a flick to the head, muttering that the kid could have burned down the whole building. He goes off to sleep, and when he enters the room, it's full of action figures of himself. The redhead, he warns him, asking him not to dare enter. That collection was more precious to him than his life, but it made Li Gun uncomfortable, so he took off their heads to make them bearable. The next day, Hugo only saw news about Li Gun, and he was definitely alive. Someone comes to take his order, but he immediately realizes it was Yang Wei, who had possessed another body to communicate with him. He thinks he has to find Li Gun before anyone else, but he doesn't have any clues as to where he might be. Later, at the Ares Divine Painting, they tell him about the appearance of someone who defeated the household gods. They also mention that Hugo's disciple had cancelled his plans to return, putting the goat god on high alert. Additionally, they had found a disciple passed out wearing only his underwear. According to witnesses, he argued with a handsome man. This calms him down a bit because Li Gun wasn't handsome, but there was a possibility he had changed, and if things continued this way, his position would be threatened. At the Gemini-affiliated hospital, there is an old man complaining that they couldn't leave his son in that state, but they calm him down as they had sent an S-rank Gemini disciple, Permafrost, to handle it. Then, the two friends are at the supermarket. Jimmy asks if he really thinks it could be Li Gun, but the redhead doesn't deny it. Physically, he's completely different. Besides, Li Gun was a hero who saved humanity, not a thug. Suddenly, a blizzard shakes them both. It was a thief, a disciple of Scorpio, who could move at extraordinary speeds, allowing him to steal everyone's belongings and wallets in just 5 seconds, and not even an S-class could catch him. But someone punches him, leaving him on the floor. It was Li Gun. He had forgotten to tell them to buy some chicken. Then the guy who looks bald but isn't appears, remarking that it was impressive since Scorpio disciples are very hard to catch. Based on his energy, he seemed like a normal disciple, so next time he should call the police. Suddenly, a loud thud makes everyone present tremble. The thief thinks the earthquake is the perfect chance to escape, but as he tries to flee, a calamity appears. But he doesn't care, since not even calamities could catch him. However, he gets caught. The supermarket activates the emergency drill. A calamity was inside. They tell the civilians without blessings to evacuate the building quickly. Because of the Red Queen's appearance, it has become a red zone, as everyone falls into despair. A child is targeted by a calamity, and the protagonist arrives to the rescue. He didn't understand why there were calamities in a supermarket, but that didn't matter right now. It had been a while, so he'll do a bit of a warm-up. The scene shifts to the Goat King. He's informed that a calamity had appeared in a supermarket. The Spider Queen, he believes it's the same creature they were unable to defeat. He thinks it will be very difficult to face a red-level calamity on his own. It's explained here that there are 6 levels of calamity. Blue grade is the safe level of God. Green level, which are safe areas. Yellow level, which are areas of caution. Orange level, which are dangerous areas that must be secured. Red level, which are areas ruled by calamities, and black level, which means the destruction of humanity. And now, that spider has appeared. So the supermarket transforms into a red zone. The goat leader tells them their only option is to bury the supermarket. No one could find out. If people find out the spider was there because of them, they could lose followers and power. They'll say everyone there died and they'll send disciples to the site to bury the entire building. Inside the building, the guy who isn't actually bald was freezing the calamities, feeling proud that this was why he was an S rank. But the calamities break the ice easily. Jian appears and tells him to move, to make way for the professionals, and starts throwing sodas as if they were bullets, and in the process, slicing through everyone with his skills. Thanks to that, he has new skills and will be able to create artifacts. The bald guy complains, wondering how it was possible. Someone so weak couldn't take down those calamities, not when even he hadn't been able to do anything. But then he realizes that he was the person who had ambushed the disciples of his divine squad, and it was clearly him since he was wearing the same clothes as them. And he also had the Gemini insignia. He screams that this was clearly why he was so strong, because of the divine artifact. But then, the Queen Lane appears. John doesn't hesitate for a single second and attacks everyone present is left stunned. It was insane. A single person could stand up to a red-level calamity without any divine artifact. The redhead and the bald guy receive a telepathic message from their captain. They had to get out of that building quickly. The Ares group was going to bury the entire building, and they had no way to stop them. They are desperately trying to hide their mistakes regarding the Spider Queen. The bald guy had teleportation skills, so the two of them could get out without any trouble. The redhead, seeing the situation, she refuses to follow orders. There were too many people there. Her best friend was also there. The E's rank argues that there was no other way out. He only could teleport 2 people and didn't plan on being buried alive, so he told her not to bother him. He couldn't ignore orders from the captain of the Divine Squad, so he decided to get rid of the dead weight, so she wouldn't have to worry about them, threatening to kill her friend, and both of them take their stances, activating their powers, and a scratch hits the bald guy on his back. His friends tell him what was happening, that they had to heal the wounded, save the people, and prevent them from being buried. The S rank emerges from the rubble, shouting that they were going to die, but he was going to save himself. But the Spider Queen catches him and eats him. Seeing the situation, Jeon asks them to go help the wounded. He'll take care of the Spider Queen. It'll only take a moment. From the perspective of Yang Wei, his seal for some reason wasn't working, and a great power emanates over the place. It was a giant snake. People come running out crying for help, reporting that there were wounded people inside, and the spider had been killed by a man. Yang Wei is shocked. How could anyone do that? Not even he, one of the 2 chosen, could do it. It was impossible. He had to check for himself what had happened. He can't believe it. The Spider Queen, a red-level calamity, lay dead at his feet. He can't find a logical reason for what happened. He hears the voice of someone he knows, and sure enough, it was Hugo's, but it was impossible for him to do something like that. A cold shiver of fear runs through his body as he hears the words. "Hello, Juan Carlos. How is your daddy?" Gion asked why his face was so distorted. Since they hadn't seen each other in a long time, outside the supermarket, the redhead realizes that he really could be Gion based on his movements. At that moment, Hugo arrives, and we're told that he is the redhead's father. He was very worried, but he gets no answers, and Jimin mentions that Gion must be fine. This upsets and shocks Hugo, who asks him to tell him in detail what happened. And an explosion is heard inside the supermarket. The goat had attacked Gion without warning because he felt cornered, but he calms down once he realizes it was Lee Gion. But he looks very different, young and without any scars, and he asks him how he dared to forget his place and go against him. He had to prepare for what was coming, but the protagonist strikes him in the stomach, and while he's in the air, he follows up with another blow. Once on the ground, he calls him out. They stole his divine artifacts and wealth, even forging his will, so he's going to kill them all and destroy everything they have. Yang Wei says that the way he speaks and acts is very similar, and he couldn't even see his movements. He thinks it might actually be Jian, but if it really was him, he was going to prove it by summoning the divine god, the Jade Emperor Ares. He uses all of his abilities, binding him with chains and launching a massive amount of swords at him. He declares that he hasn't been wasting his time for 20 years. He was clearly much stronger than before. But the pile of swords shatters and Jian lands a direct hit on the man in red. He finally recognized him. He really has returned from hell. By defeating him, new skills were awakened that he is now ready to use. The god Ares was stunned, trembling and shouting that it was impossible. Jian used to be merciful, but now he'll make him feel what he felt for 20 years. Hugo arrives at the scene and realizes that clearly, the only human capable of doing this was Jian. Finding Yang Wei's body, he wonders what has Jian become. Meanwhile, the protagonist is at the Ares Museum of Divine Artifacts, but inside, the facility only held fakes, except for what Jian was looking for. He pulls it from its display, and immediately, all the guards in the area surround him, threatening him that if he doesn't return the artifact, they'll have to use force. Jian refuses and attacks them all with a simple move, activating a line. It was this little thing, which was incredibly strong, and an alert message pops up. That door was protected by divine artifacts. Seeing people run, Hugo thinks he arrived a bit late, but then he spots him. He runs toward him. He starts talking to the guy behind Jian. Crying, he thinks his scars have healed. He looked a bit different, but he was glad he was alive. Then Jian kicks him. He asks if he should give him a beating so he'd recognize his friend. Hugo cries while hugging him. He really was alive. He hits him again and confirms it really was Jian. Then the god of Sagittarius appears. He questions how Jian could be alive, so he decides to see what happens if he shoots an arrow at him, but Hugo tries to calm him down. Jian explains that when he left the tower, his house had been sold, his will was settled, and all his relics were gone. He was furious, so he'd have to strike back. A crowd is heard in the distance, complaining about the man who stole the items, but Jian had only taken a few small things. The guards knew they were no match for this guy. That's why they called in a monstrosity to stop him. And then, the beast of wealth, Picho, appears. Our hero knows exactly what to do. He asks for his divine sword to show off his true power. That sword had been awakened through the power of the snake. Thanks to that, he can clearly see the beast's weak points. Hugo thinks he's incredible, always charging at his enemies without any fear. He was proud, but then the beast crushes him with its paw. Nah, just kidding. Jian lifts it up without any trouble. It was his turn to attack, cutting off the beast's leg, and with his second attack he releases his power, not only defeating the beast but destroying everything in the area with a single strike. Hugo believes that was the same power he had 20 years ago. A message appears for Jian, asking if he wanted to tame it. That beast he accepts, and Pichu was now his. It could also shrink down, and he celebrated the fact that he could now store even more treasures. Later they start arguing, and Jian calls him a traitor. Hugo thinks that's unfair since he's been worried about Jian all these years. But Jian says that's a total lie. Hugo got married, had a happy family, and enjoyed life while Jian was trapped in a pit of demons. He says Hugo should be ashamed, especially since he didn't even recognize his own friend at first. But he tells him not to feel too bad. After all, divorce isn't so bad. Hugo clarifies that he isn't divorced, but he doesn't want to talk about his wife. Instead, he asks how things went down at the tower. At the time, Hugo was outside, and by the time he entered, the others were already carrying the head of the Crimson Eye. He also asks John not to tell his kids anything, because they're huge fans of his. John begins to tell his terrible story. He was stabbed in the back and thrown into a trap, a place crawling with endless calamities. On top of the constant threats appearing without end, the dead Crimson Eye had also come back to life. It turns out the one they saw wasn't the real one. The real Crimson Eye was deep inside the tower. He managed to defeat it, but the real problem wasn't the beast. It was the tower's administrator, a demon capable of reviving dead calamities. After 20 years, he finally managed to get out, killing the administrator at the end of his path. Exhausted, he remembers dying there, but when he woke up, the calamities were gone, and he had gained his current abilities. It was all very confusing. But he knows one thing for sure. The bastard who stabbed him knew the tower's layout. He plans to punish the constellations, but he'll make the one who betrayed him suffer the most. To do that, he needs to build the right team so he can give him a proper beating. Using a fragment from the Spider Queen, he creates a B-rank hobby horse. It has several special qualities, and while Hugo thinks it's pretty good, he doesn't think it looks impressive enough to be high rank. Jian tells him he has no idea how many materials went into it. In fact, he was planning on making one for Hugo too, but after those comments, he can forget about it. Hugo immediately starts sucking up to him, calling him a genius for being able to create divine artifacts. Jian then pulls out his unique divine artifact, the Safe of the Golden Fleece. He heard Hugo was broke, so he brought it to fund him. Hugo shouts that he isn't poor. Jian thinks that as his rank increases, he'll create even better artifacts, but they soon realize that no one there can actually use it. He curses everything because he had already sent a declaration of war to the radio station. Well, they just had to find another way to deal with it. The scene shifts in Korea at the Blue House. Several leaders of the divine groups are gathered. Oliver, from the Leo group, is arguing with Choi, the captain of the Gemini group, about what happened with the Spider Queen. They're throwing accusations at each other about everything they did wrong. The two are about to fight, but an alert comes in. Something big has happened. A message has appeared in the news with photos of Yang Wei and a note saying, "I'm back," signed by the late Lee Jian. Hugo scolds him, asking how he could do such a thing. To make matters worse, he announced it everywhere. It was clearly a declaration of war, and killing someone like that was too cruel. But Jian hadn't actually killed Yang Wei. He had just turned him into this little plushie. His skills had improved significantly from the experience of that battle. Now, he was able to capture Yang Wei's soul. He also shows Hugo the dagger he was stabbed with. It was a special grade, so it couldn't have belonged to Yang Wei. It had to be someone else's. He decides to visit the Divine Artifact Shop to get more information. At the site of the disaster left behind by Jian, the Saint of Ares, Sophie Marty is informed that there's a slight possibility that Jian is still alive. She thinks it's just a bad joke and says they're heading to the artifact shop. Divine artifacts to sell them and make some money so he could buy other artifacts at the auction. But another saint had also applied to take part in that same auction. His name was Stephen Marker, a man obsessed with the divine artifacts made by Jion, and he was the Leo Saint. Meanwhile, our protagonist was in the city heading toward a divine artifact shop. I've said divine artifacts a lot, haven't I? My bad. This shop had an S-rank appraiser. The red-haired guy gave him the tip, thanks to his boss. The boss wanted to meet the person who defeated the Spider Queen. For bringing him there, Jion gives him an A-class dagger, and they arrive at the shop. At the same time, people are amazed to see such a beautiful person. It was the Aquarius Saint, Sophie. She asks to go inside but can't, as someone else was already in there. On the outside, she accepts it, but on the inside, she was furious. Inside, the appraiser asks about the item and who had made it. When he finds out the protagonist made it, he thinks he might have some connection to the hero Lee Jion. He asks Sun Hai to please wait outside, as they needed to talk privately. Once alone, he explains that not many people knew Jion was a legendary producer. He says that while there were many fakes of the artifact Jion brought, this one was different. He can feel it's a masterpiece by Lee Jion, and he recognizes it because he was actually the hero's disciple. Jion is confused, as he doesn't remember ever having a student. He's about to give him a piece of his mind, but the man hands him a notebook. Jion remembers it. He was a rookie who had followed him 20 years ago. He had a great eye for items. Jion had left him that book back when he was young. He had entrusted Lee Jion's legacy to him. The book begins to glow, but they are interrupted because the saint was waiting outside. She starts complaining that they shouldn't keep her waiting. She was the Aries saint. She forces her way in, and as she enters, she notices the man. He was very handsome, and she felt the need to get closer, but the aura and power of the snake make her kneel in fear. She felt as if hundreds of snakes had coiled around her, and she runs away desperately from that place. Jion finds out that she was Saint Sophie, and he bursts out laughing. He hadn't recognized her because of all the plastic surgery. She might have changed on the outside, but her heart, full of trash and filth, never will. In an alleyway, Saint Sophie is having memories of the old Jion. She thinks that power was overwhelming and felt just like his. She gives the order to go back to the pawn shop and simply kill everyone. The appraiser deserved it for ignoring her, and the man for triggering her past trauma. She will use a divine artifact that grants the power of a god. And as expected, she obeyed, since there's no way to refuse a request from the 12 celestial beings. Later, the red-haired guy is walking peacefully through the central district. He realizes that the water has a small amount of mana, and bodies of water begin to appear throughout the sector. The redhead confronts a guard about why they were using a skill in a neutral zone, but she was just following the will of heaven, activating a divine object and trapping everyone in water bubbles. She will now deal with the appraiser and the man. Inside the shop, the appraiser is trapped in a prison of water, and Jion was held at knife point by the guard. The saint had told her to kill them, but if they apologized and bought the divine artifacts, they might be forgiven. Then Jion grabs the knife and breaks it with just his fingers. They had told him not to move and attacked him with a water dragon, but Jion dissolves the attack with a single jab. Seeing Jion's strength, she pulls out her best weapon, something made with the saint's mana, an orange rank summon. The water wolf. Jion grabs some daggers and stabs the wolves over and over. The guard was shocked. He had destroyed her best weapons, and seeing the look in Jion's eyes, she runs away. Immediately, the redhead enters and describes what happened outside, saying they had to leave the area, because more people might come. He says he would recognize those movements anywhere. He asks if it was possible. "Are you Lee Hyun?" He thanks him and tells him to come back whenever he wants. Later, the two are eating ice cream when this guy arrives. He was the captain of Choi's divine squad. He was delighted to meet him. He had heard many wonderful things about him. He was looking for talent. He tells him that one of Jion's 8 divine artifacts will soon be up for auction. So, they could go discuss a deal he has for him at that location, and only he can take him there because it was a private venue. The scene changes. In Fortress City, Drak Ma, the Blessed One of Aries, was there, along with the Blessed One of Leo, and also Hugo, the Sagittarius Saint. Sophie goes to talk to Hugo, trying to annoy him. He used to be the most handsome of all the saints, and he was strong back then too, but everything had changed because his disciples were so disappointed in him. Hugo ignores her, but she makes a comment. He couldn't just do whatever he wanted. If he did it again, he might lose his children, just like he lost his wife. She wasn't dead, but because of his incompetence, his family was falling apart. Hugo doesn't like her words at all, so he unleashes his skills and throws a punch, but Sophie blocks it without any trouble. She makes his position clear to him. He was too weak to raise his voice to her. And just as she's about to attack him, Jion appears, neutralizing her ability, and gives her a flick on the forehead, stunning her. He asks Hugo not to follow him everywhere, asking if he liked him, and that girl was also following him everywhere, so maybe she liked him as well. Then we're shown the Saintess's memories. She hated Jion and was afraid of him, with his horrible scarred face, his personality, and his cold eyes. One day, 20 years ago, Jion arrived, demanding to know how she could be doing that. He had sent her to the rear to treat the wounded, but most of the people under her command had lost arms and legs trying to protect her. Because of her mistake, they were going to heal those people immediately, but she screams for him to let her go. She didn't care if those people died, no one would care. In fact, they should be happy to give their lives for the saints. So Jion slaps her. He says she needs a good beating to teach her some values. Later, she wakes up and screams when she sees that he's right in front of her. She thinks they underestimated her by tying her up with just ropes, but Jian notices and hits her for being stupid. She laughs because she has an ability that activates when she's hit, making her body boil with acid. But as we know, the protagonist has the ability of healing and regeneration. And now it was time to settle the score. She had sent someone to kill him, so she would face the consequences. By hitting her many times, his skills improve, and he gains divine status, which allows him to have disciples of his own. He doesn't quite understand, but he leaves the rest to Hugo because he's going to the auction. And at that very moment, the Leo Saint arrives, Steven. Steven, who activates his power immediately upon seeing that Sophie was captured. Hugo had no intention of telling what happened. He was only there for the auction, and he shouldn't be there just to get Jian's weapons, as they wouldn't make him any stronger than Jian. Hearing those words, Steven thinks that he needs to know his place. He shouldn't keep talking about Jian in front of him, because now he was the strongest of them all. Suddenly, a disciple shouts that someone is buying up all the items. The saint had no time to waste on Hugo. He immediately goes to see what's happening, giving him one last piece of advice. He had to control his attitude if he wanted to stay alive. In the VIP room, Jian is buying up item after item that used to belong to him. The man with glasses had given him the option to buy whatever he wanted so that he would join his divine temple. He offers him all kinds of perks. If he joins Ares, he could be the successor. He would have wealth and honor, all for free. But Jian feels like they're asking him to become the lackey of some pathetic god. Just then, they hand him a divine artifact that he had purchased. The man with glasses, terrified, asks to return the relic, since it belonged to Jian and someone was obsessed with his items. They could get hurt if he found out. Suddenly, the door is smashed open. Steven enters aggressively, demanding to know who dared to lay hands on his items. The captain explains the situation and apologizes. They would return his item. In fact, they were going to give it to him for free for the trouble. But Jian didn't agree. He wasn't going to return anything. It was his, but he'd be willing to sell it for 200 billion. Steven laughs. He thought Gemini only had cowards, but this guy was different. Because of his great courage, he'll give him a gift, launching an attack with the spirit of Leo. Clearly, that attack could finish off anyone. But the protagonist obviously wasn't just anyone. He thinks it's now his turn to give a gift. For the first time in a long while, the saint felt fear. But at that moment, a new item was announced for the auction. Steven gets excited and leaves, because finally he would be just as strong as Jian. The only thing that set them apart in the past was that Jian had a weapon. He was convinced of it. What was right before his eyes was the strongest artifact, the one that would proclaim him the strongest. And in the distance, a calamity dragon also plans to get that artifact. That bone was an artifact Jian had obtained in a high-ranked tower. The bids were sky-high. Everyone wanted the legendary weapon. Jian watched as his money increased. It was quite a spectacle. Then Steven's voice shook the stage. He had offered 1 billion. 1 billion. Man. $1 billion for that item. And since no one bid any higher, it was sold for $1 billion. When finally Steven was happy to have obtained the most precious thing in the world to him, everyone began chanting his name. Suddenly, a wall of the venue broke. It was a calamity demanding the divine item, attacking Steven, who swatted it away and sent it to the other side of the city. Because of that, the magic tower began to crumble. If that debris fell on the city, it would be destroyed. As a result, all the disciples gathered and released mana to prevent the debris from falling. But at that rate, they couldn't destroy it all. At that moment, the Saint of Sagittarius jumped into action. Everyone thanked him, but then another calamity appeared, which could use the bodies of its prey to control them. Hugo charged in, but in a moment of distraction, the other calamity appeared. Luckily for him, Jian kicked it and insulted Hugo, asking Hugo why he was still so bad at fighting. He felt awkward having such a weak friend. Hugo defended himself, thinking he did his best, and then Steven entered the scene, complaining about them interrupting his experience with his divine artifact. He used a royal skill against the calamities and the people present. That was his famous lightning storm, which couldn't be destroyed. He used it to test his new weapon. The people said they were saved. He was the strongest man in the world, even stronger than Jian. But when he landed a hit, absolutely nothing happened to the calamity. He tries again and again, but nothing happens, and the calamity sends him flying. Meanwhile, Jian was furious. How dare they lock him in there? But since he was already there, he would deal with the beast. It had taken the people hostage, so he couldn't attack easily. But Jian had a plan to free them by force. Hugo thinks that it's impossible. Jian thought from the start he would have to handle them alone, so he didn't expect much from him. But Hugo would still cover his back. The protagonist attacks with his black whips, freeing everyone from the mind control, but he was too confident. The mind control could regenerate, but Hugo was there to support his strategy, and Jian manages to get into the perfect position for his big strike. Thanks to that, he gets new and better skills. Meanwhile, Steven was badly injured, wondering why the Great Bone didn't work. He was being cornered and Jian appears to kill the calamity. The beast instantly senses the danger. It leaves the Leo Saint to focus on this man, but Jian uses his new skill, releasing all his power and creating instant pressure against his opponent. When Steven sees this, he thinks only one man could do such a thing. The protagonist was glad to meet the person who had been messing around in his name. They attack him with the super bone, but he stops it easily, and with one hand he breaks the top of it and also lands a blow that shakes the entire city. In fact, he pierces the city with Steven's body, and since everyone was already safe, he uses Ucha to collect everything of value. He tells Hugo that he knew someone who had come to the auction with him. His name was Sun Hai, and he was young but quite brilliant. Hugo couldn't believe it. He had been careful to keep his children out of it because they were fans of Heian. His family life was about to become a mess. He immediately tells him to cut ties with Gemini, as it was a society with only evil intentions. Besides, its disciples were just as bad. But a father makes himself heard. He says he had introduced himself as Li Heian to that man, but there's still a whip, which attacks him. But Lime eats it. John demands he spit it out. It could be dangerous, and he shouldn't be so greedy. Eating the first thing he finds. Seeing what happened, Sun Hai recognizes Lime, an artifact belonging to the hero Jian. Between the power and skills shown earlier, and the fact that he's the only person his outcast father acts friendly with, like Yo Ha, he asks if it could actually be Li Jian crying with emotion. Later in the United States, at the Leo Saints headquarters, they are discussing the attack on their saint. They still haven't found him, so they need to do something, but she doesn't want to look for him. In fact, she's going back home. She didn't care what happened, since her brother told her there was a cool guy at their house. She was Chun Yo-ha, one of the 10 stars of the Leo faction. The news is only talking about Jian and what happened. Saint Sophie is hiding in her house, because the day before she was going to give a conference, and the necklace Jian put on her revealed a message, which said, "Tell everyone the truth about 20 years ago. I'm not dead." She didn't know what to do. She had been put in a very difficult situation. The most sensible thing would be to give a statement about what happened 20 years ago. The news announces that Sophie will give an explanation soon, and a mysterious figure thinks that this won't be good at all. At the Sagittarius Sanctuary, the home of Hugo, they are practicing archery, and as always, Jian humilla a Hugo. Yang Wei treats him like a king, which makes Hugo angry, since they don't even bring him a glass of water. The protagonist researches his sanctuary and divine faction, realizing he needs members. Besides, he had an appointment to meet with many people that day. The man with glasses is trying to convince him to join the Gemini faction, offering him everything, the money available to him. It makes him annoyed, but it was a unique opportunity for him. So after thinking it over, he accepts, but with one condition: he wants the badge they carry and access to the fire forge of their divine cadre. He also needed that badge to use the benefits of being part of the Gemini divine cadre. He was the type of person who needed something tangible to trust them. He says he has another appointment, so they need to hurry up and decide. The guards couldn't stand the disrespect, but as for the redhead, he was overjoyed because Jian had given him a dagger. But then this guy shows up with 2 friends to steal it from him. The blonde was a Gemini disciple named John Chihuahua, but we'll just call him Glenn. They were trying to provoke him, but he couldn't do anything since he was the son of the Saint of Libra. They knew it, which is why they acted that way. He yells at them to give it back, but the 2 friends grab him and throw him against the table. The blonde asks if he's sure he wants everyone to call him a coward for yelling so much. They knew he was a fan of the hero Jian and said he was just as pathetic as him, or maybe he was pathetic because of his mother, who was in a coma. Hearing those words, the redhead loses control, releasing his power and activating an ability that made Jian appear, who then headbutts the blonde guy. Jian is surprised to see Sung Hai. He was just about to sign the contract to join Gemini, but he ended up there instead, and since he was there anyway, it meant these guys were threatening his dear nephew. How dare they hurt him? He'll show them what happens when they mess with a loved one. As for the friends, they were already dazed on the floor. Glenn kept saying he couldn't do this. He was the son of the company president. He repeated it over and over, but Jian was determined to teach him a lesson. Glenn didn't think he could be humiliated like this, so he activates his paralysis bull ability. Our protagonist thinks he might have something more interesting, but no, he easily suppresses his ability, and he'll show him how to use a true power. He tells the redhead that whenever he's in danger, his uncle will have his back. Then Nona appears on the scene, whom Sung Hai happily introduces. He has defeated countless calamities, a hero who saved humanity time and time again. The protagonist of the movie they watched over and over when they were little. He was Li Jian. Nona couldn't believe it. Rubbing her eyes, it might be Li Jian, but he was way too handsome. 20 years ago, he was covered in scars, but his looks didn't matter. She was just glad he was safe. She introduces herself and asks for a favor. She knew it was a bit bold to say this, but it was urgent. But just as she's about to give him the message, a calamity appears inside and Nona cuts it in half. She couldn't make her proposal properly if there were calamities nearby. The alarm goes off again. Calamities had appeared inside the city. Everyone had to evacuate and seek shelter immediately. Nona was desperate. She had to do it even faster. She wanted to finish as quickly as possible so she could propose marriage to Jian. He had been watching to make sure she was safe, but they were strong enough. They even had a better sense of battle than Hugo. But in a moment of carelessness, a calamity is about to attack Nona. The calamity remarks that they were quite strong. Normal humans couldn't dodge its attacks, so it would take him as a pet. John thinks this moment is perfect since he needs to gain followers, so they're gonna have a little fun. He asks the nephews to take care of the calamities, because he knows they're strong, and now they will have fun together. They manage to reach him and hit him, but it doesn't affect John at all. He asks if that was all it had, but she replies that it clearly wasn't. They were saving civilians, but Nona thinks that Uncle Gian was definitely very strong. But his opponent was a fantastic race, the most dangerous among the calamities. She thinks she can't lose him again. The calamity thinks that maybe it had hit him too hard, but Gian emerges from the flames. They were quite strong, and he was going to use them as a gas burner for his forge. Now that he has some flames, he can't wait to use his hammer. The calamity doesn't know what he's planning, but it won't let him use it. Janona appears to stop it, but her attack is useless. The calamity slams her with just one hand against the building wall and tells its pet to devour her, but Gian appears. He warns it. He'll kill it if it touches his niece again. Looking death right in the eye, it senses its end, which forces it to transform into its final evolution. A fantastic beast with wings from hell, a red-level danger. To honor its power, it decides to destroy him with a single attack. It's shocked. He has blocked its hellfire with nothing but a vinyl glove, and it will pay the price for burning the city by being the fire for his forge for the rest of its life. And Gian hits it with a purification strike over and over, but you can't purify someone who's already dead. The lizard has given up, immediately becoming his slave. Nona approaches and he remembers what she said about her proposal. He gets a little nervous, but Nona had a theory about his past. She couldn't understand how all the saints survived that day, except for him. Even though he was the strongest of them all, the only theory that made sense was that he'd been set up. Gian is surprised. He should have expected this from his friend's daughter. She was right. 20 years ago, they betrayed him. It was the 12 saints, and it was clearly because he outshone them all. He killed the Crimson, the greatest calamity of all. They could control the world now, but they had one obstacle left. They felt very sorry for him. He was locked up for 20 years. They even took his glory for themselves, even though he was the one who saved humanity. Gian calms them down. He was fine now, and that was all that mattered. Now, he'll move on to the last thing on his agenda for today. Saint Sophie was giving a statement. She was between a rock and a hard place, but she had to tell the truth. If she didn't, Gian would finish her. And she tells everyone that the person who really killed to the Joe Carmessi that day, it was Li Jian. Everyone is filled with doubt, asking many questions about what the truth really was, and a sinister shadow appears behind Sophie. It was Jean-Louis Morin. He looks French now, the saint of cancer. Turning off the microphone, he asks Sophie if she had lost her mind. He tells her she should act as usual, if she didn't want the world to see him rip her throat out right then, and told her to keep quiet. He turns on the microphone and explains that Saint Sophie was just talking nonsense at the moment. He apologizes, saying what they had told before was simply the truth, but the reporters weren't happy with the answer, so he is ready to use his power to shut them all up. Li Jian appears, giving him a kick. Sophie screams that he's here, and for good measure, he also gets a tail swipe as a gift. Jian demands an explanation from the rotten crab for stopping his conference. The cancer saint and the others didn't understand and didn't know who was standing before them. The protagonist claims he was the hero, Li Jian. Everyone burst out laughing, since he didn't look like him at all and seemed quite weak, and Jian will prove to the crab that it really was him, and to the journalists too. He asks Sophie to spit out the whole truth in front of everyone, but a purple aura fills the building. The cancer saint had released his god, and he'll give his old comrade a welcome. At home, Hugo is happily eating some ramen and sees the news that a man claiming to be Jian is currently fighting with the Saint of Cancer. The Saint of Cancer shouts if he only learned to dodge during 20 years. Jian shouts back, asking if all he learned in the last 20 years was how to make clones. The Cancer Saint creates a whirlpool of power that drains the soul power from everyone present. He had simply decided to use his blessing to finish him off. Jian asks if he was the one who stabbed him that day. Jean-Louis asks if the world's hero is really holding a grudge from 20 years ago. People would think he's just a bully. Plus, his ability isn't just simple clones. He's created clones using the life force of the journalists. This means if he destroys a clone, they might die. He attacks with all the clones, but Jian switches places with his tail and strikes the real Jean-Louis. He knows this was only a part of the real one, but he still has a prize for him. He pulls the core out of his body and gives it to the snake, and everything returns to normal. Jean admits it was a good strategy, but tells him not to celebrate just yet. He still has more cards to play. Jian knew he wouldn't just stay quiet if he was defeated, and then he gets a call from Hugo. Hugo yells at him, asking how he could do such a thing. He was watching the news and saw that Jian just took out one of Jean-Louis' high-ranking subordinates, which triggered a rain of missiles. It's explained that the Marmot missiles were created after Li Jian's disappearance. Capricorn and Genesis worked together to create a catastrophic class weapon for the calamities that humans couldn't face, becoming humanity's ultimate trump card. Jean-Louis had set them to fire automatically if his life signals ever stopped. The protagonist comes up with the perfect plan to prevent the destruction, and he looks at Saint Sophie. The city alarm goes off with a message telling everyone to evacuate the area immediately. Missiles would be falling within the next few minutes, causing total chaos. But Jian approaches with the Aries Saint on his shoulder. He knows she can turn anything into liquid. She screams, asking how on earth she's supposed to do that. Jian puts the pressure on her. If she can't do it, then everyone will die. So she has to give it her all. High in the air, the divine god of Aquarius is shocked by the situation. He casts all his buffs so his chosen saint doesn't die. Royal skill, tear of the goddess. He did it, and Jian lets her go into a freefall. She had done a great job, but if those fragments hit the ground, they would also cause chaos. So he should give a big greeting to the witch. He contacts Hugo and demands that he lend him his ability. Jian thinks that should be enough. He had the power of the Saint of Sagittarius and the Saint of Aries. He casts a teleportation spell, sending all the fragments to another location. Everyone was safe, and the fragments were thrown to the location of the divine painting of the Saint of Gemini. Later, at Xianhua High, they're discussing how Leo hasn't appeared. The saint was defeated, Cancer was taken down, and the missiles were blocked. The protagonist appears, crashing through the ceiling, asking what they were whispering about him. They arrive with the captain and Hugo. They were there to get their money back. Even though he was sure he'd made a will, all his assets had been donated to the wrong places. Most of it had been donated to the witch. They explained that it was hard to oppose the Korean government. Their first option was to give the money to Hugo, but since he wasn't Korean, they couldn't give it to a foreigner. Plus, because of what happened in previous years, he had lost a lot of credibility. Jian hits them since they chose a witch over his friend. Who did they think they were to look down on his friend? He knows he was a mess and acted like his slave, but they couldn't treat him like that, even if he's a saint with no money and absolutely broke. The more he talks, the angrier he gets. He tells Hugo to be strong and demands that all his belongings be returned. But then a voice shouts for him to shut up. It was the voice of Heisi, the Saint of Gemini. She wasn't going to return anything as they owned the bank accounts, and besides, her palace had been destroyed. She'll have to use that money for repairs because of him, and now that he's right in front of her, she'll get rid of him, summoning a fairy spirit. This spirit was one of the strongest, but Jian didn't care, and he grabs her, throwing her through the air. Seeing the situation, the fairy tries to escape, but Jian grabs her by the head. He tells everyone that this clearly wasn't the Saint of Gemini. And well, after seeing all that, they clearly had to give the money back, or something very similar would happen to them. Leaving the building, they're happy to have recovered Jian's assets. And they also had an idea of where the witch might be. Back at Zunhei's house, they were eating, and the fairy queen was trapped in a safe. She had to answer everything they asked. That strange witch still hadn't appeared, but he knew she wasn't just hiding. In fact, it wasn't that she didn't want to, but that she couldn't. He gives her one chance to tell him exactly where she was. She, seeing the power he was radiating, points to a figurine. Jian already knew. He could smell the witch's stench in that house. He uses his third sense, and sure enough, Heisi was inside that figurine. We're told that from the very first minute, she knew Jian had left the tower. She knew what happened. So she decided to investigate him by turning into that figurine. But since Jian had broken it, she couldn't return to her original body. She asks her summon to help her, but the summon refuses. She orders Sunhai to help, calling it a divine command, but he couldn't bring himself to obey. Even though it was his duty, he was the enemy of his divine order. Hearing these words, the redhead decides to stop being part of the Gemini divine order. If he had to face his hero, it was better to stop following her. As he throws down his badge, a loud crash echoes for his actions. He would receive divine punishment. The saint begs him to reconsider and ask for forgiveness. He was the one meant to take her place, and Jian was a despicable man, but he tells her to shut up. They would abandon anything for their own convenience, but his hero was different. He would always save those in danger. He tells her not to dare look down on him. He shouts those words with blood streaming from his eyes, nose, and mouth. By the divine power of Gemini, the goddess was going to get rid of the redhead. However, Jian uses Abyss Sever. This causes all the followers of the Gemini divine order to lose their powers. He thanks Jian for saving him. The saint demands to know what he had done. Her power had completely vanished. Divine gods spend a lot of resources when entering this reality. That's why they always provide for a saint, and that saint distributes the power among all their disciples. In other words, the god is the power plant. The saint acts as a power transformer, and the disciples are the outlets. Therefore, Jian had cut off every connection to the plant. That was an ability from the Cancer, and he had stolen it. She refuses to believe his explanation. It was impossible. If he did that, the goddess would surely intervene. But that was the plan of Jian. Now in this scene, the goddess Freya was gathering power to launch her attack. However, Jian pulls out a fragment of the Cancer core. The goddess was surprised. He regretted not having a blessing, because if he had one, he could send them all flying. But he would have to settle for the Scythe of the Abyss, attacking the goddess. The spectators are shocked. He could actually wound a god. The scythe breaks, and the divine goddess Freya gathers all her power and summons portals everywhere around them. But a shout to stop rings out. It was Hugo and the Gemini god, proclaiming that divine gods cannot interfere in this world in their true forms. Clearly, the Sagittarius god wasn't enough to enforce that rule, but they weren't the only ones opposing her intrusion. And multiple messages from all the gods begin to appear, lending their power for breaking the rules. Several chains surround the goddess, inflicting punishment before she leaves. She says she'll never forget what happened that day. Jian tells her to bring her older brother next time. After everything, he thanks Hugo. But this was only the beginning of what he had planned. He won't rest until he puts an arrow through the head of that goddess's brother. Hugo had also gotten him what he asked for from the Yin-Yang Palace. That building had maximum security, but he used stealth and infiltration to steal it. Upon opening the scroll, Jian registers the affiliated spirits. Berserker, a legendary type, Jotun, the Giant of the Giant Kings, a legendary type, and the Warrior Har, also a legendary type. They were Gemini affiliates, but they wanted to join Jian. He didn't fully trust their loyalty, so he asked for proof, and they handed him Heizi's body. With that proof, he accepts them all. Heizi cries out that this is a nightmare, but Jian tells her to shut up. Her goddess has completely abandoned her. He asks if she was the one who stabbed him. After choking her for a long time, she finally admits that it was Virgo. Alright guys, here are the saints on screen so you don't get the constellations mixed up. Also, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to subscribe and like the video. Thank you so much. He says she should have told him that sooner so she wouldn't have to endure so much pain. In exchange for the info, he'll return her body. But he accidentally gives her body to the fairy, who is very happy about it. This also made Nona angry. Later at Hugo's house, they are deciphering contracts for their summons, which are double S rank. The Gemini Saint was locked up with Jian's other relics, and the new members of his house were very excited, even shouting with joy. Hugo thinks it was the first time he'd seen such happy summons, but the three of them tell him to stay out of it. They say he's just the errand boy, but Jian corrects them, saying they're misunderstanding. He wasn't an errand boy, but a slave. Surprised, they tell Hugo that if he's a slave, he shouldn't speak. Jian asks why they preferred him over the divine god of Gemini. They couldn't stand that god's tyranny, and it wasn't just them, but the other gods and their commanders as well. Currently, due to the unknown civilization feeding the calamities, humanity has lost half the world. At first glance, it might look like the saints and the calamities are in a tough balancing act, but the reality was very, very different. They were at a point where they couldn't reclaim the land already taken by the unknown civilization. Jian thinks about gaining allies. The civilization is under the Gemini Sea, at the bottom of the Pacific. It must be right next to the unknown civilization, so he'll have to check the situation and come up with a plan. The three brothers kneel before him and swear loyalty. They will support him in all his plans. Jian thinks it's impressive. Little by little, he's gathering high-ranking domestic gods. Nona thinks it's great, and that's why she did a good job proposing to Jian. Hearing this, Hugo's personality completely changes. What do you mean propose? Are you kidding me? The Goat Saint says that would make Hugo Jian's father-in-law, and Hugo fires an arrow at him. He says he couldn't even get his daughter to say she loved him on Father's Day, so he couldn't stand this. He uses all of his skills. Jian thinks that, in reality, this guy didn't know how to hold back. The way he's acting reminds him of a certain person. His kids scream for him to stop everything. He couldn't beat the hero, Jian. He was weaker. Jian asks why he's getting so angry over what the kids are babbling about. Does he really think he's the type to go after his daughter? Hugo almost burned the whole house down in his rage. The kids struggle to express their feelings, but they love him a lot. They were bringing him coffee and cake. He gets excited, but it turns out it was for Jian. He had uploaded the video of the fight as they told him, and looking at his piece of cake, he realizes they gave the strawberry to his fiancée. And in just then, Nona receives a warning message. A red-level calamity has appeared at the Divine Bridge. All disciples were required to respond immediately. In the sea near the capital of the Philippines, Manila, the forces of the Leo Divine Frame were already there, giving a speech about how difficult this battle would be. But they told everyone not to fear, as it was a great chance to prove their courage, even though their saint leader wasn't present. Inside a tent, this guy was watching. He felt those men were just barbarians, trying to make up for their lack of skill with speeches, but he didn't care about that. He wondered if his gift had reached the right hands. The messenger had arrived at Hugo's destroyed house. They talk about what had happened, and the box starts talking about where Jian was. He was busy forging new weapons, but it wasn't working out. The hammer he was using wasn't right for what he needed. He regrets not having the hammer that grants achievements. He had no idea where he could recover his weapons, and it was hard to get materials from divine artifacts just to throw them away like that. Then, he hears the voice of someone familiar. A goat statue introduces itself. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. It was Sergevich. John recognizes him but calls him Sebastian. But his name was actually Sergevich Vladimir Ivan. He was the Capricorn saint, and like Jian, specialized in production. Since Jian's disappearance, every prominent weapon in the world had passed through his hands. He wanted to apologize for the events of the past, and hoped to start a new cooperative relationship. But the protagonist slams him against the wall. He figured that if the guy was talking about him, whatever he had to say was probably garbage. Sergevich Vladimir noted that he was as grumpy as ever. They asked him to come out. It was time. On the news, they report that they've come to cover the red-level calamity raid. This was the same calamity Jian had wiped out 20 years ago, but it had returned. Forces from various divine frames had gathered to fight it, including the Leo divine frame, though Stephen was missing. There were magic specialists, transformation experts, and war masters from the Pisces divine frame. The Iron Wall from the Taurus frame was there too, along with the Battlefield Saints from the Aquarius frame, and the Capricorn divine frame, which was in charge of producing and strengthening weapons. Many divine frames had been deployed for this joint strategy, and even the Capricorn Saint himself had appeared. Jian didn't understand why that old geezer was on the battlefield, but when he saw the old man holding that hammer, he shouted that the object belonged to him. Not only had the man stolen his items, but he was also showing them off, so Jian decided he'd have to give him a beating. Suddenly, on the news, something absolutely massive appeared. Emerging from the depths of the vast ocean was the calamity itself. The Thousand Arms, a red-level danger, and as all the units prepared for battle, they saw someone hanging from a tentacle. It was none other than the Leo Saint, Stephen Marker. He was fighting the calamity alone, but they realized the reason for his struggle was that he was obsessed with that bone. The old man asks if they were ready to begin. The captain saw through the guy's intentions, knowing he was just trying to steal the reward. But since he was in charge now, he ordered everyone to take the Pisces physical strength position. The Aquarius members provided buffs, while the Taurus units were in a defensive formation to protect the rear. The Leo forces were ready and waiting to attack thanks to everyone's abilities, and those from Leo's divine frame had given the signal. All the mages were to attack. Stephen challenges them, saying they couldn't attack until he pulled out his bone. And meanwhile, Nona was about to jump into action, cutting the tentacle of the giant octopus. Everyone attacks together to claim the reward, but something comes to the surface. A monstrosity appears. It was the Mega Kraken Bridge of the Week. Risk rating, deep red. Seeing the calamity, the old man thinks they can't do anything against them. He'll set off his explosives even if his comrades were nearby. But a dagger breaks the detonator and Lime takes a bite. John appears. Sebastian was a piece of trash. The kids at sea were struggling, unable to deal with the swarm of octopuses, but wasn't it overkill to use a bomb to blow up their entire fleet? He'll have to reflect on that, and he'll teach a lesson on how to prepare raw octopus. As for Nona, she had used all the energy in her legs earlier, so she didn't have much left. There were many small octopuses, but they had to deal with the boss first. She uses Auto Solar. She had seen her uncle's skills over and over again, so she was able to memorize them. Right now, she could replicate his skill. And once she was close enough to the body, she aimed straight for its eyes, but the Kraken easily blocked her power with a tentacle. The beast attacks to kill Nona, but the Leo Saint appears to step in front of the attack. Dazed, she imagines what her uncle would have done in that situation. She imagines him wielding his sword as he flew toward his enemy. But then she realizes that was actually what was happening. Jian launches himself into the attack. He uses the skill Great Mountain Piercing, taking down the centipede with a single strike. The soldiers claim he only landed the final blow on one of the small ones, but then the Kraken grabs him and swallows him whole. But Jian bursts out from inside the Kraken and unleashes his lightning bolt attack. Suddenly, new messages appear. People he didn't know were watching him with respect and awe. They were starting to feel a sense of reverence. The reporter announces a historic event that will be talked about for a long time. Li Jian, the returned hero, has single-handedly defeated the Kraken and the 10,000 Arms. In the distance, Jian hears his niece's voice. She asks if he's okay, and he notices the bone behind her. But anyway, since he broke her spear, he'll make her a replacement weapon soon. She's overcome with emotion, and the Leo Saint jumps for joy, because she was his direct subordinate. If Jian is offering her a weapon, it meant he might make one for him too, and since he broke the bone, which cost a lot of money, the least he could do was compensate her with a new weapon. Suddenly, a green explosion erupts behind Jian. This green mist caused the people from the Leo faction who inhaled the smoke to lose consciousness and be controlled by Sebastian. Jian demands to know what he had done to Zulaim. Sebastian says he'll show something interesting as he gives a signal, and the men affected by the smoke take charge about catching Nona and Jian. He talks about how great it was to see him crushed like that. It was sublime. Stephen asks him what he had done to his men and why none of them were following his orders. He had given all his men a potion, and thanks to the chemical reaction, they can only hear his commands. And if he wants his men to go back to normal, he had to listen to him. That was a weapon Jian himself made. He makes him an offer he can't refuse. He had to kill Jian, so his men would return to normal, and they had something in common, an inferiority complex toward Li Jian. He punches the walls seeing the skills of the hero, and he punches the walls seeing the crafting skills. But the harder they tried, they realized they couldn't bridge that gap. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. He would create the best weapon in the world for him. By combining their strengths, they could surpass him. The Leo Saint grips the sword. Nona screams at him not to do it, saying she won't forgive him if he hurts her uncle. Stephen, looking at Jian, thinks it's a unique opportunity, but then, after throwing the sword, he shouts that he'll never listen to him. He's determined to surpass Jian, but he doesn't have time to waste on an inferiority complex that would put him on that same level of cowardice. The old man couldn't accept that lack of respect, so he attacks. Leo says that 20 years ago, he was a ball of inferiority complexes, but he's tested his limits over and over while failing again and again. all for the drive to surpass Jian. Then Jian appears beside them, asking how much longer they were going to take. He let himself be captured to see what Sebastian was planning and how Steven would react. But they took too long. He tells him to get out of there. He had a few questions of his own. 20 years ago, from Sergevich Vladimir's perspective, days before the Demon Tower raid, someone tells him that Li Jian will die. And he's not talking about Hugo's prophecy, but a plan to end him. That electrified him. It was the chance of a lifetime. But Jian breaks through the rift in space and time and breaks Sebastian's flashback. He didn't care about his past, he agrees, and he'll tell him who it was, but he had to guarantee his safety. Jian thinks he's in no position to ask for anything. If he wasted his time, he'd rip out his tongue and jaw with one blow. Seeing that, he tells him it was Virgo. He wonders if Virgo was actually the mastermind behind it all. He had to go see his appraiser to check the results of the daggers, and they also had to return his hammer. Sebastian was trembling after losing his hammer. Jian asks the three brothers to take care of Sebastian, freeing Leo's subordinates, those from the Capricorn Divine Square. Seeing that their chosen one was defeated, they activate a plan to kill Jian themselves, firing a missile at him. They planned to send him straight to hell, but Jian also wanted to show off his new toy, hitting the bomb with his hammer and turning the bomb into fireworks. Leo's army was ready to get revenge for what had been done to them, but instead, they retreat and run away. He yells at Jian that he couldn't let them escape, asking for a balanced, durable, and easy-to-use weapon. Jian tells him that he had one right here, grabbing him by a leg and throwing him at them. Later, in the red zone outside the Western Protective Dome in the European Union, there was a search captain from Virgo. Jane says that the place was extremely creepy. Her order was just passing through to see what was happening there. Her mission was to search for troops who went missing yesterday. It was difficult, and the red mist and atmosphere were very heavy. Everyone hears screams calling for help. They run to save them, but as they move forward, the captain feels like he can't go on. Screams were coming from everywhere, and they sounded repetitive, as if they were recorded. He tells everyone to stop, but when he turns around, no one from his squad was left, and a branch asks him for help in a sinister way. They were like souls in misery haunting him, and a giant shadow appears behind him. At Hugo's house, a few days had passed since the fight at the bay. Jian was watching the news reports about himself. His name was everywhere. He receives a notification. He needs a disciple to be able to activate his divine square. He also activates his God's Eye ability and asks Hyun Jerry to look him straight in the eyes. He sees she has 85% loyalty to Chingu and 81% to the snake owner. She wouldn't work, as he needed someone with more faith in him. One of the three he had in mind had to be able to convert. He asked where they were, but they had gone out that morning. And then he gets a call. A flashback of the redhead begins. Screams are heard. Run, save me. I don't want to die. Please save me. Someone tells him to listen. He has to hide in the car until his father arrives. He could think of it like playing hide and seek. He had to hide so the monster wouldn't find him. He had to be brave until then. He had to promise to be brave with a smile on his face. He screams, "Mom," and wakes up. Nona calms him down. Hugo also tells him to relax. After all, he always gets nervous or has bad dreams when they visit his mother. And Nona comes up with an idea. Now that he was awake, she would give him his birthday gift. He said he needed a divine artifact that could store Gemini's magic power. So his dad and she bought it for him. She was happy because he was so excited, and he was always sad on his birthday. Nona tells him that he had to always stay happy so his mother wouldn't feel sad. Hugo says nothing, only gripping the handlebars tighter in anger. In room 808, Chum Haiwo, Nona is telling stories about what happened these past few days, about his uncle, the battle, and various other events. She was very excited to tell her everything, but she would say more once she woke up. It was his mother. Hugo, with his head down, stood outside the door and a call from the shadows. Today was an important day for him and his family, so he wanted to avoid any work deals, but the European alliance countries were looking for him for a simple disaster cleanup. He asks if Virgo isn't nearby since he's the strongest, but they wouldn't call Hugo unless it was an emergency. Virgo had already refused to fight that calamity. In fact, it was one of the most dangerous calamities. He had already encountered it in the past. It was the one that destroyed the airport 10 years ago. The blood frog in the EU's national jurisdiction. Virgo, Belgium, Gion was talking to Zunjie about becoming his disciple, but he couldn't. He thinks that deal would be difficult and apologizes. He thinks that maybe he didn't know his nephew well. They hadn't even told him it was his birthday. They seemed to be hiding something. Something must have happened on his birthday. And just then, the appraiser arrives, Jim Jung. He had used a portal to reach Virgo's city. He asks, why was it the city of Virgo? First of all, he explains that Europe was always culturally influenced by religion. After the appearance of the saints and the group system taking root in the world, Europe became a massive theocracy. And you could see on every dome who protects them everywhere. Their faith must be very solid, but they were going to get straight to the point. He creates a soundproof barrier and shows him the information on the dagger that stabbed him 20 years ago. He managed to capture some memories left inside it, and after investigating the memory fragments, the culprit who stabbed him was Kevin, the Saint of Virgo. At Hugo's house, he asks the fairy, Larry Quinn, to investigate why Zunjie rejected his offer to join his squad. He must be up to something. He was still in Gemini and had already lost all faith. After a few minutes, Sunhai arrives to ask for a favor. He was in luck, he could get information in exchange for that favor. He asked her to open the teleportation portal to Gemini's secret library. We're told that the Gemini library was a place where forbidden books existed that only high saints could read. Last time, he threw away his badge, so it was hard for him to get in. He needs to find out something extremely important to him. She accepts, but he had to tell her all his intentions without lying to her. What he wanted to find was the spirit's summoning skill to summon beings from other worlds. The scene changes. Jian is at a train station thinking about the dagger's revelation, but he knows a powerful evil being was involved, strong enough to harm not just a saint but a divine god. It could have been John Lois, but he wasn't capable of attacking gods. He was convinced that the jerk who stabbed him was deeply connected to the disasters of the unknown civilization. He needed to recover his strength as soon as possible so he could face him. And at last they arrive. The elite troops of the St. Hugo Otters are now inside the disaster area, burning and clearing out the smaller calamities. They ask what those branches were, as they made it hard to walk. John thinks it was a coincidence. He didn't expect them to be dealing with Virgo, who brought them there. They had come at Sagittarius's request, receiving a commission to handle the disasters, and Hugo Saint met with the European government to give a detailed explanation of what they were going to do. He had accepted the job because of the special circumstances. The monster that desired the powers of all the saints. They ask him if he had ever heard of the monster from the Blood Mist. At the political headquarters of the European Fiscal Department, they explain the situation to Hugo. The calamity had appeared 10 days ago. Virgo had moved in, but his forces were reduced to 0. Additionally, Lord Virgo was dealing with a similar threat at sea. That's why they were looking for help from other divine groups. He and his friend were the best for the job, and no one else was available. Hugo thinks it was an obvious trick. The Saint of Virgo knew they would accept. They just had to mention the Blood Mist calamity, and he would never say no to that job. As for John, they tell him that his chosen one's wife died because of the Red Mist. She died trying to protect her son. Both she and his first disciple, the captain of the divine group, Li Wen, passed away. John knew that guy. He was the one who helped them carry things 20 years ago. Now he understood why Hugo avoided the topic of his wife. He never thought something like that could have happened. Honestly, the Hugo he knew wasn't like this. He knew how good he was, since he was the one who taught him how to fight. When he was in his prime, he trusted him with his back without hesitation. That Hugo of the past was one of the strongest among the 12 saints. He asks them to tell him all the details of what happened to Hugo. They agree, though it wasn't easy to talk about. But since it was him, they would tell the story. That horrible incident happened 10 years ago, on Sunhai's 7th birthday. In the Redhead's past, he and his mother, Chun Hai-wo, an honorary member of Sagittarius, were at the airport. Li Hai-wan, the first disciple of Sagittarius, was also there. Sunhai asks for some food, so Li Hai-wan goes to buy some. While waiting, he hears two brothers arguing about a mistake they had made, but they run away because they didn't want to die. The mother tells him they should leave, but a huge shadow appears right in front of them. The lights in the airport go out, and a red mist begins to rise from the ground. The mother grabs her son and tells Haewon that things were looking really bad. The first disciple drops the bags of food, and the calamity lunges without hesitation to devour the mother and her son, but a sudden push saves their lives. Lee Haewon had given his life to save them, and even on his deathbed near death, he gives a thumbs up and smiles to show that everything was going to be okay. Seeing what happened, the mother runs out to save her son. The scene was cruel. Many were dead, others were wounded and screaming for help, and the mother told her son to hide until his father arrived. Until then, he had to wait bravely for his father. She asks him to promise, and a vine surrounds and captures her. In Han Wei's mind, he only thought about telling her so many stories. He cried, asking for forgiveness as branches approach to catch him too, and a flash of fire appears on the scene. It was Hugo asking if he was okay. He was fine, but his mother wasn't. He understood it. He manages to spot his wife and calms down. Thinking there might still be a way to save her, he tries to pull her out, but the souls of his friend and his wife appear begging for help. This leaves him frozen, losing all sense of reality, and a branch pierces through his ribs. The calamity smiles and sucks out his celestial power, but the saints enter the scene. They were there to help him. The three attack with their strongest powers, but the calamity is too much for them. It had the ability to swallow magic. Because of that, it could regenerate. The calamity attacks. Its attack was devastating. It could even break the barrier. They were in trouble, but a fifth chosen one appears, using branches of the Golden Rule. The Gemini Saint asked them to use teleportation. That calamity was too strong. Even the four of them together couldn't defeat it. They had to send it somewhere else. Hugo shouts that they couldn't do that. The souls of everyone present wouldn't be saved, and he could still fight. She was reaching her limit. The barrier wouldn't last much longer. She demands that the spell be cast. There was no more time. She agrees. Hugo screams desperately for her not to do it. That day, all the media and everyone else criticized Hugo. They only praised the other saints. On the other hand, Sagittarius, who had been protecting Korea, was criticized by the citizens. Not only did he fail to stop the disaster, but there were more victims than necessary because of Hugo's actions. Rumors spread that he chose to save his family over everyone else. He was seen as too selfish. Hugo apologized publicly, but his country wouldn't accept it. They criticized him harshly, over and over. They yelled every insult you can imagine at him.